Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It is 10 o'clock here in Alaska, and I think it's roughly 6 p.m. in Ireland, where
It's
Jan may
7:08
7:08, where
now.
Jan is
Mhm.
currently located. I'm thrilled to have Jan back. She's been traveling a little bit. She can maybe catch us up on some of that through the course of the conversation that we're going to be having here today. Today's topic is on presence and discernment. And that came up in a previous posse talk that we had. And as I began to think about this, the first thing that occurred to me is I'm not exactly sure I have a good working definition of discernment. So I look it up. I looked it up, and here's what the dictionary had to say. Discernment refers to the ability to perceive, recognize, and make thoughtful distinctions, often with the aim of understanding or choosing wisely. It involves a combination of insight, judgment, and wisdom that allows one to evaluate situations, options, or truths critically and objectively. And the moment that I read that definition, and in a way, I'm sort of embarrassed to report that I'm just really getting intimate with this word right now. But as I read that definition, I began to thought, man, this is perhaps one of the essential keys to anybody who is practicing presence. Because very often we are seemingly run. I don't know if those of you listening or Jan, how this hits you, if you've noticed that it is possible to go through the day completely unmindful, just reacting to what shows up, getting a stimulus, having a response, having a reaction, and not putting very much thought into what it is that we're doing. And I know we've all had the experience of getting triggered, having a reaction, likely in this scenario one that is a little bit harsher than we would have liked it to have been when we kind of review it in the rear view mirror. So, kind of the way that I'm processing this when I think of discernment, specifically in light of that definition that I just shared, I'm looking at it as the moment between the stimulus and the response and what we do with that. It's like in between those two. And if we're just reacting, obviously, the moment between those two can be almost immeasurable. It can be so brief, stimulus response, it just comes right back at us. But we have the ability, particularly if we are wanting to live more of our life in presence, we've got the ability to allow that pause to expand. And it may take a little bit of retraining some of the things that we've been conditioned to do in the way that we interact with other people, but it creates a space where we can just take a brief pause to think about how do I most want to respond to this? And what do I most want to add to the conversation? So I'll pause it there and reintroduce Jan to the group. And I'd just love to ask Jan, what are your initial thoughts to that? And what, if anything, while you've been out wandering the beautiful parts of Europe, have shown up for you in your travels since we saw you last?
Sure, I'd love to talk about all of
Good.
that. Well, similarly to yourself, discernment is not a word that I would use every day, though it is a word I'm familiar with. And there are people in my life that I would consider quite discerning. And when I sat to reflect on what that actually meant to me, it's not too far from what you just spoke about. Um, one of my friends, when her daughter was like 1, 2, 3, anytime you would engage with her, she would stop dead in her tracks and you would have her full attention. And she never responded without reflecting, even at that age. And I used to say she's a very discerning child. And so I think that is what it means. It's people that I find discerning are people that take the time to pause and reflect before moving on. I was in a conversation this morning, Bobby, and we were talking about touching base and how important it is to touch base with ourselves.
Yeah.
And how often we run past base. And we were talking about coming home. So there's a bit of all that tied up in discernment as well. But I love the way you described it, the space between stimulus and response. So it's about taking pause and being mindful and aware and conscious. Um, when I put it with presence, it was funny to listen to some of your definition because it doesn't feel like critical thinking necessarily, more like
Yeah.
dropping in. And it's not a function of critical thinking when I'm choosing to discern necessarily. It can be, but it's not always, and it doesn't have to be. And sometimes it's checking in with head and heart and gut and anything else I can check in with. But it's that process of taking pause
Yeah.
and just noticing where you're going or what direction we're taking ourselves, whether that's in thought or in action.
One of the things that this really resonates for me from like some of the coaching that I do, where I'm sort of explaining this without previously having to use this label, is well, two things really. One that you just mentioned about touching base and how often, we haven't seen each other for a while and we kind of had some technical difficulties. So we didn't do the normal catching up that one may do, which probably would have proceeded with me asking how you're doing and you asking back. But during the day, and if you're listening to this, just take this moment for a pause and consider how often do you actually check in with yourself, and it only takes a second, but really just taking a moment to check in and see how are you doing in this moment? How do you feel in your own skin? How do you feel in your environment right now? And that's inquiry, and it's a very light form of inquiry. And the important part of inquiry is understanding there is no right or wrong answer in the exploration. There is a right or wrong answer in the context. So, a good analogy of that might be getting in your car and looking at your petrol indicator to see how much fuel you have in your tank currently. And the initial check may show you're 1/4 full. You've got 25% of your capacity in there. That in and of itself is just information. Now we can put it in context and say, well, I'm just going to the grocery store and coming back. It's only going to take just a little sip of that. I've got more than enough to do what I'm looking to do. Whereas if you were about to go on a big road trip, you would say that needs to be one of my very early stops. But what I'm encouraging us to do as a baby step, if you're not doing it currently or feel like you're not doing it enough, is just to check in and see how are you doing in this moment. And it's easy to imagine if you're feeling joyful and somebody has, there's a lot of jokes that people make that are kind of dig oriented. They're kind of like playfully pointing out what we may perceive to be a flaw in our personality. And if I'm receiving that and I'm in a particularly joyful state of mind, I'll probably laugh right along with that. And I may say, yep, that's me. I definitely do that. But if I'm in a more agitated state of mind, if my mental tachometer is going closer to the red line, it may be that that same exact statement, phrased in exactly the same way, might really just hit one of my raw nerves, set off a trigger, and I could react very, very harshly. And the only difference, once again, is the context. But in this case, it's my inner context and how that's going. It applies to ourselves within, but I'm guessing probably in your old role of a HR person, there were a lot of interpersonal
Yeah.
squabbles that happened because people just didn't take the time to really discern deeply what was going on.
Mhm.
Was that your experience?
Absolutely. People making assumptions and drawing conclusions and thinking that impact equaled intention and lots of variations of all of that without any self inquiry. If I feel this way, it must be true. If these are the thoughts in my head and this is how I feel and this is what I see, then it cannot be anything else. And it causes a lot of conflict. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it was one of the reasons, Bobby, that I got into the whole area of coaching and mentoring in the space of well-being was because it looked to me that an ounce of prevention would be worth a pound of cure. And if people in workplaces really understood how experience is created, it could change so much, so
Yeah.
much. And it does change so much.
Yeah, it does. And there's a from NLP, there's a phrase I'm sure I've kind of ran it through the cobbulator a couple of times and put it into my words, but I got this from one of the foundational presuppositions of NLP, that we are all always doing the very best we can in the moment with the resources that we are able to access in the moment. And that's what's happened in that scenario that I described earlier, where
Yeah,
in one inner context that I may be experiencing a free and joyful moment on the inside, a little bit of a dig that was really intended to be funny and was looking to
yeah,
generate a laugh would land exactly as it was meant to land. But if I'm in a wound up state and my mind is
yeah,
agitated, and the thing that happens in that case is my own access to resources
yeah,
starts to kind of evaporate a little bit.
yeah,
And I can only go to those well worn paths that I can
yeah,
travel in the dark. And to the degree that we can realize that ourselves, and we can realize that is what's happening in the people that we're interacting with too. So if perhaps somebody takes a little bit of offense, we might at least think as much about, wow, what's going on inside of them that they reacted that way, as we would to reflective, saying, the typical response, if I'd say a joke to you that happens to in the moment offend you,
Yeah.
my conditioned response, at least based on my own conditioning, would be to defend myself and say, hey, it was just a joke. And like start to put up boundaries to protect myself, rather than recognizing my friend, somebody that I care about deeply, is in a mental space at the moment that what I thought was a loving, admittedly a little bit of a dig, has offended her. And wow, she might not be in a super resourceful place. And what can I do as a result of that? And I mean, to me, I feel like when we're talking about discernment in the context of living life more mindfully, practicing presence more widely and more expansively in our lives, that those two little steps to check in and see how are we doing and how's the other person
Yeah.
doing, which takes seconds. I almost feel like you could, if we can master those 2 points, that you kind of would probably increase your emotional
Yeah. Let me show you
intelligence
something.
quotient. You would travel quite a bit up the scale, and that's the beautiful thing about emotional IQ, is it is completely malleable and
Absolutely.
completely
Yeah.
open to change.
I hand these out in my trainings. They're pause buttons.
Oh, I love it. Okay, got it. Yes, beautiful on the screen.
For that very reason. But I love what you're saying, Bobby. And in my experience, sadly, in workplaces, the culture and the conditioning is fast and furious, and people don't always stop to discern what's going on. And the well worn path, when people are in a low state of mind or they don't have much mental juice left, and something happens that they react to, what I see across the board is, as humans, when we're in that space, we seem very willing to hurt other people and less willing to listen. And you
Yeah,
talk about a second, it happens in a nanosecond. It's like some emotion arises within people and they're gone. And they're so fast and furious already. And if they're low on juice and, low state of mind, they don't see that moment that they could have some discernment.
yeah.
So
Thing,
this practice of pausing and checking in is so important. And it really helps bring to life what's going on in our thinking
yeah.
and in our
And
nervous system.
in our nervous system and in our body.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love your little button. A good friend of mine just wrote a book, and I'll get the name of it because it's worth looking. It's a book on mastering the art of self hypnosis. He's another hypnosis trainer.
Okay.
In fact, I've been to his training. He trained me how to do street hypnosis.
Oh, well.
His name is Anthony Jacquin. You can Google it. It's just released, so it'll probably pop up. And in there, he talks about one of the processes he uses is stop, and similar to the way that you use pause. And he'll hold the hand up as though he's holding up a stop sign. And stop is an acronym that stands for, the S is actually for stop, take a breath, observe what's going on. That would be an observation of yourself and in others, and then pause and proceed. And it's a beautiful little acronym that can help us to do that. And I actually have
I'm going to write
uh,
that down.
a little exercise that I do with clients. It's not, it's kind of just a short visualization that gives you an embodied understanding of what we're talking about. And what you were pointing to earlier is pointing toward what I think are the 6 or 7 primal questions that we want to know in every minute. And often, if we are surprised, you can, usually on reflection because it's happening so quickly, but if you pause after a big surprise, you can see that you ask these questions. Like if I walk in the woods a lot and lots of moose and lots of bear in Alaska, not as much of this time with the bears at this time of year, but there's still a lot of mooses. And right now they're rutting. So, the males are randy and they're protecting their harem. And it's
Stay out of the
exciting to
way.
say, yeah, it's exciting to, in the least, to say uh, what goes on when you run across one of them. But I'll give you a different scenario, one that's much more pleasant. If you can just imagine yourself on a drive that you've been on that was like the essence of the most pleasant drive that you've ever been on. Traffic is flowing effortlessly. You're lost in thought, whether it's listening to music or the Presence Posse podcast, whatever sends you off in just a tremendously blissful state. And if that were to continue, that may well very turn into one of those drives that we take from time to time where we can remember getting in the car and we're now at the destination, but there's very little muscle memory of what we did to get there. The turns that we took were just automatically, we didn't have to pay a lot of attention to what was going on the road. And if you're in that state of driving and you suddenly go up a hill, and as you're cresting the hill, you see this sea of red lights up ahead of you, a couple of things are going to happen. Number one, that driving trance state that you were enjoying so blissfully is immediately going to be interrupted. And this is really, where I use this particular story is to tell people what it's like if they're under hypnosis and suddenly the building's on fire, or I fall asleep, or I have a heart attack, or whatever, or I just start to make an inappropriate thing. We wake up because our critical mind, even in our deepest state of bliss, the sentinel is still there standing guard, and it'll stand guard quietly in the background. You won't even notice that the sentinel is there until you see that sea of red lights. And it's going to be boom, massive pattern interrupt immediately happens. And think about the questions that we ask ourselves. And maybe not as much in the driving with all of these, but we're going to want to know immediately what's happening. Am I safe? Why is this happening? Is it my fault? Am I responsible? And what should I do next? And, there's more, but in those basic ones, just imagine somebody who is in a very vulnerable state and starts to ask those questions. If you ask it on the drive, odds are good you're going to be coming to a complete stop. You'll be in the line. Your lights will also be red. And you'll take the time to kind of figure out what to do. And you're no longer in the trance. Now you're back in critical mind operating mode. And so you just process. But in like a workplace situation where you feel like you're being threatened, those questions about, am I safe and what do I do? If the answer to come back, am I safe? And the answer's no, we immediately are going to be thrown into a situation where our parasympathetic nervous system is lit and things are going to happen. And if it's a moose or a bear in the woods that is causing that reaction, 100% appropriate, and you're extremely thankful that it's happening, because part of that fight or flight getting lit up is we are unable in that moment to think about anything else other than the we are 100% perfect practitioners of presence in that moment, and we're hypersensitivity, hyper awareness. Our mind's actually kind of pretty quiet in that moment, because there's not a lot of thinking about, how am I going to make the mortgage payment? What about this idiot that my daughter's dating? All of those things. How am I going to get the promotion at work? Just those things that often fill our mind just are not showing up at all. So in that context, it's a good thing. But in the workplace or any place else, it's a horrible thing, because we will do anything in that moment to guarantee our safety, including lashing out what we perceive to be a threat. I've had noises come out of me that I don't know where they came from when I was encouraging the bear to stop coming down the path in my direction. It's like I channeled my inner gargoyle or something, and
Oh, to be a fly on that wall.
that's okay. And it worked brilliantly in that context. But if I'm doing that in a boardroom at a team meeting, everybody's going to wonder, wow, what do we need to do to get him back on his meds? I mean, it's just a reaction, and the discernment is in
Yeah.
that pause that takes place. How does that land with you? How does that hit you?
That resonates beautifully. And the one thing I would add, I'm not adding it because you mentioned it earlier. I just don't want to lose sight of it. When we can take that pause, we don't need fixing or to go to the mental institution. We can very simply start breathing
Yeah,
mindfully
yeah,
in and out. In through the nose and out through the mouth. Even breaths, even 30 seconds will create enough space for you to see a little bit more clearly what's going on. It interrupts the thinking pattern and allows the system to settle down, and it puts us back in our body.
yeah.
It's it's that simple. It
Simple
doesn't
yet
fix everything.
unbelievably profound.
Yeah, yeah. It's the noticing that it's a time to take a pause is the only piece that's a bit of work or a challenge. But once we'd stop and pause and just breathe into our body and into whatever is going on in the body, in and out, as we do all the time, it just has a profound settling impact.
Yeah, it particularly, I think a good thing for people to do is to practice that when they're not under stress.
Yes.
And then to the degree that you're either hitting your pause button or seeing my friend Anthony's
Yeah.
um, sign, that book, I just looked it up, by the way, is called Alter Your Experience.
Now.
And in that, Anthony is a very gifted, classically trained hypnotist, but he's also a teacher of presence and a practitioner of presence, and he's really dived into that. And the thing about this book that excites me the most is he's talking about how to use very well understood and basic, as well as some advanced techniques that he's added, um, to come into presence more and to take
Mm.
that pause and to operate from home base,
Yeah.
to come back
Touch base.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, to where you're safe again. When I remember when we were kids, we would play all kinds of games, and almost always there was a tree in the game that if you were physically touching the tree, you were safe. And we called that home base. And I think that's a good space for us to,
Love it.
maybe we need to get an H somewhere in that acronym to have
Yeah.
a home base step,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and to move forward. But it's such a powerful
Yeah.
thing, and just practicing it any time that the thought comes up, and just notice, by taking conscious control of our breathing in a little bit more fully,
Yeah.
breathing out a little bit more completely, and doing that 2 or 3 times, that immediately triggers our other nervous system that is working in combination with the parasympathetic, which is, that's the yummy one that we all love. That's the one that we access to get into the Zen temple.
Yeah.
And when we're there, our heart space is opening. We're physically opening our bodily posture. We're less likely to be like this. We're relaxed. We're a bit more contemplative. And the breath is the key in either one of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can use Wim Hof type breathing to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, and that will make you impervious to cold if that's something that you want to do, because it's coming back to heat your core up and keep your inner body safe,
More.
and numbing out your limbs so you can do things that appear to be superhuman, but you can also just change your internal experience and
Mhm.
get accessing back to
Yeah.
home base a bit. So one technique, and I'm curious kind of how you taught this in the HR world. So one technique that I suggest people use is 3 steps. One, practice it when you're feeling calm. Right now is a good time. If you're listening to this and you feel nice and yummy, just still take conscious control of your breath and notice what it feels like to breathe deeply. Second time that you can practice it is anytime that you're irritated, or somebody gets on your nerves, or you find yourself reacting a little bit harshly, but you're still relatively calm. It's just somebody's kind of screwed with your bliss a little bit, and you find that irritating. Use that as a cue, as a trigger to return to your breath, and just 3 deeper breaths, more full breaths in that context. And then finally, the place to do it, and this may take more than just 3, but when you really feel like the world is closing in on you, return to your breath. And I'll end my point, and then I'm interested in kind of your thoughts, and specifically how people
Yeah.
who are forced to interact with others might
Hmm.
be able to use that. But I'll share this one story of my client who called me from jail. He had been arrested. He was scared. I was far from his first call. He was calling friends and family. And one of his friends said, maybe you should reach out to Bobby, which he did. And it took quite a while in this case. He was able to talk for like 9-minute segments. and then he would have to wait in line and call back. And it probably took 3 or 4 calls. So I'm going to say around 30 minutes to get to the place where I just kept saying, how are you feeling right now? Breathe, breathe, breathe. How are you feeling right now? And we did that. And from his end was, I'm in prison. There's murderers and rapists and everybody else in here. How the F do you think I'm doing? I'm scared for my life. And I said, just kept saying, that's not what I'm asking right now, this very second. How are you doing? You're talking to me on the telephone. Breathe. And that took a while. So, maybe don't wait until you get into jail and you've got a coach that you're working with on this. Take
Yeah.
some intermediate steps before then. But what we're doing when we do it, when we're calm, when we do it, when we're slightly agitated, when we're doing it, when we're in a fearful state, we're building a new neural network. And ultimately, if you do it enough, and I don't know for you what enough is, but ultimately, if you do it enough, that can become your default conditioned go to move anytime that you experience any quote unquote negative emotions. So, enough of
It's
my yap.
certainly my go-to.
Yeah, yeah, it's everybody. It
um,
can and should be everyone's goal.
yeah.
Yeah,
Similar to yourself, I mean, I hand out these buttons a lot, and I suggest that people put them somewhere where they'll see them, and that every time their eye catches it, that they actually take a pause. To your point, to build a muscle, to get the practice in, because it's not going to happen automatically in a moment when you need it if you
yeah,
haven't built the muscle. It's not the first thing you're going to think of. Um, So, and really, I mean, I'm not trained in breath work. What I used to say to people was just, we can all breathe. You can stay in a conversation. You're going to be breathing anyway, but just notice whether you're breathing in your chest, high up here, or in your lungs, or even better again, if you can do a bit of belly breathing and, blow up your belly like a balloon with every inhale and fully, empty it out with every exhale, and try and keep the breath in and the breath out even if you can. And but just the deep breathing alone and exhaling, you can do that without people noticing if you need to. I used to often recommend to people, if they had to do a presentation and they were nervous about speaking in front of others, to even just go into the bathroom and take 2 minutes and ground yourself
yeah.
and just breathe a little bit and notice the difference. Um, I also hand out these little kaleidoscopes to people, and I invite them to see if they have the same picture in their kaleidoscope after they've done their little pause. Um,
Wow.
because 9 times out of 10, it's a different picture, even if it's only slightly different. That space creates a new picture of what's going on. Um,
Wow. That's such a beautiful metaphor.
And people love the kaleidoscope. And I think the kaleidoscope is what encourages people to take the pause. Um, but I'll tell that. So that's what I do in workplace, whether it's conflict, giving difficult feedback, a difficult meeting, a presentation, whatever. Um, but you asked me earlier about my adventures or my travels, and I've been on such an adventure and I'm still on it, but it's not the adventure that you think I've been on.
Oh, okay. It very often isn't.
No. Um,
The
so
one
we
we
were
plan and the one
planning.
we go through are not always the same.
No. And I will preface this by saying an adventure has ups and downs and unexpected and unknowns, and that's why they call it an adventure. um, so yeah, we had these plans to go traveling to Europe, and personal circumstances dictated otherwise. And
Ah,
we just had some unexpected things happen. I won't go into that. Um, but the upshot of it was we were planning on putting our house on the market next spring, and we invited up the real estate people. in September because we were here to say, have a look, tell us what we need to do before putting it on the market. And, we had some questions. So they came up and basically said, there's nothing to do. Your house is ready to go on the market. The market is strong. We have people looking for homes. Why not put it on now and just test the market and see what happens?
Okay.
So we said, okay, we'll give it a whirl. In the background, we've been saying for 2 years now to anybody that will listen that when we sell our home, we're moving back to Limerick, which is the town we were both born in and grew up in, which is about 2 hours from where we live now. So we've been looking and looking and looking for houses and places to live up in that area, that side of the country. And we have found nothing that we're interested in. And we've been looking now, actually looking for close to a year. And there just isn't anything up there that interests us, essentially, other than new builds, which are concrete jungles. And, we're not going into one of those. So I've also been saying to people that I trust when we put our house on the market, the right buyer will come along, and I trust when we go to Limerick, the right house will appear on the market and blah de blah. So we're going up and down to Limerick on a regular basis, viewing houses, visiting people, doing other things. And one day we were up there and we just looked at each other and went, what are we doing? Why do we think this is where we want to live? This is not where we want to live. And we're going to go, okay. But it was only by being present to what was going on, Bobby, and noticing our responses to our experience, to our search, to how we were feeling about the whole thing, to what we were thinking. If we hadn't been noticing that, we'd have just kept going.
Yeah.
But thankfully, we did notice it. And now it looks like we're moving to Spain, which is a lot further than Limerick, a whole different ball game. And suddenly we're excited, we're enthusiastic, and we have energy. We're looking at homes in Spain and we're going, ooh, ooh. Whereas we've spent, a year to 2 years looking at the place we thought we wanted to be, going, maybe I'll go look if I have to. And that's the power of being present.
Yeah.
And it's the power of discernment. And it's the power of touching base.
Yeah. And
even though we ran past base for quite a while, you can always come home to base.
Yeah. That is so beautiful. And I applaud the fact that you guys, I'm not surprised, but I applaud it nonetheless, that you guys recognized that.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I notice with many people that I work with who are, I kind of loosely describe my ideal client as accomplishment monsters. People who set lots of goals, achieve lots of results, and from the outside looking in, people tend to think, oh, if I only had what Jim or Bill or Sally have going for them, I would be happy too. But in reality, and many of those people are very happy, but many of them are also not. And one common thing that I find with them is they're so good at goal setting and they're so good at achievement that once they set the goal, it's like they're writing it in wet cement and it's permanent. And sometimes along the way, those signals, you had signals that it's like, man, we're in Limerick and I don't see anything I like. I'm not really digging this vibe anywhere near as much as I thought it was. And then somewhere along the way, one or both of you said, hey, how about Spain? And now your body's telling you, I think, in the way that
Yeah,
I
my
process
body's
things.
in Spain.
Yeah, your body's in Spain and your body is saying, Spain it is, baby.
Yeah, beam me up,
And
Scotty.
and the emotions that are powering your pursuit are ever present.
Yeah,
And you know, it, my people that I was describing earlier that are resistant to listening to those signals will sometimes come to me and say, I've lost my mojo, I've lost my motivation. And in the exploration, sometimes we find, well, yeah, you lost the inspiration because that's not your goal anymore. It's the one you set, and it's the one that you've diligently worked along the way. But I've noticed, and I've done a lot of looking backwards at my own life to try to figure out why I
yeah,
did things that I did. That in retrospect, it's kind of like, well, I really don't know why I did that. And like I quit golf in 2007, and it took me till about 2012 to figure out why. And it was just like, no, just I don't do it anymore. Well, why?
yeah,
Why? You used to love it. You used to love it. Yeah, I
yeah.
did, and I did.
The
I
juice
loved
went
it.
out of it. Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah.
and that was a
And
wonderful time, and it passed.
it
And I
passed.
finally
Yeah,
got my message for
yeah,
that. But many things in my life happened because of a project that I started that I shot out of the gate and there was a lot of energy. But then as I got down the road, I had a detour and it was similar to what you've had, on the road to Limerick, you suddenly got the wisdom to,
take a
no, let's
detour.
let's head south and see what we
Yeah,
find in
yeah,
Spain
yeah. And
instead.
Bobby, what was really interesting was, and I do put this down to the fact that I have that pause muscle
Yeah.
now. When I stopped to reflect on what was going on, I was so delighted with myself. Not that I did this, but what arose within me was, if this is happening, why is this happening for you? Now, 5 years ago, that wouldn't have arisen in me. What would have arisen is, this shouldn't be happening. We're on a plan here, we're on a schedule. Why can't we find this house? Where's the house? It's supposed to be there. Why aren't my spiritual team doing their job and creating the right house?
Slackers.
Slackers, yeah, exactly. But what came this time was, Jan, you're always saying life is benevolent. It's a benevolent universe. If life is happening for you, then this is happening for you too. Why is this happening?
Yeah.
Because you're not meant to be in Limerick, silly. But it's beautiful
Yeah.
with
It's
presence.
it is.
But if I didn't have presence, I'd probably have purchased something in Limerick that I'd end up going, it's awful, I hate it, why am I here? So thankfully, I ran past space, but came back. And
Mm.
there's an old quote, and I can't remember whose quote it is, but it goes something along the lines of, no matter how far down the wrong road you've gone, turn back. It's very simple.
Yeah, that's good advice. As
Yeah.
soon as you and discernment or inquiry or what or just the relationship that we have with our body and mind and what I like to call our true nature or our authentic self, that those feelings, that I think is the way that wisdom speaks to us, and it speaks in whispers. I've say
Yeah.
that probably every podcast almost.
Yeah.
It speaks to us in whispers, and the pause is what allows the inner critic to get quiet enough for long enough for us to hear those whispers of wisdom.
Whispers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. That kind of feels like a good place for us to
It
wind things
does.
up.
It
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Feels
Thank you.
sort of complete. Thank you. It's so
Yeah.
good to see you again. And
Yeah. Great to reconnect.
I got about 20 questions to ask as soon as we end the live broadcast.
Fair enough.
But before we do that, is there anything that you are offering currently, or are you kind of in a moment where you're, or
Yeah.
can people get a hold of your pause buttons?
Yeah. Well, you can contact me on Facebook
Kaleidoscopes.
if you want a pause button. Depending on where you are, I'd be happy to send you one. I'm actually in a selling up and moving mode at the moment, so I'm not offering. I'm actually winding down what's left of my HR business and taking it offline rather than in person, or remote, I guess, online rather than offline. But I am working on a new program that I'm hoping to launch in the new year, so I'll talk more about that closer to the time.
Very well.
Yeah, it's a little too early to share, but it's a program called Living Your Heart's Desire.
Oh,
Mm.
I like that. Are you going to use a clever thing with your name in the heart's desire?
Yeah, well, my coaching business is called Reconnect with Heart. So anything I do will be with heart.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that.
Me too.
And as far as I'm concerned, kind of quiet around the holidays. So this is a typical pause where I'm just kind of doing maintenance business with my existing clients. I do have a program that I'm launching after the first of the year, and that's in conjunction with my book that I recently published called Unencumbered:
Beautiful.
Living Life in Flow.
Mm.
And I'm going to have, I don't really know really how to describe it. It's kind of like a book club, and but my book, I'm going to be leading the club, and my book's going to be the subject of the book club. So I don't know how to talk about that yet. I don't have the words for it because
Yeah.
everything sounds almost obnoxiously narcissistic when I explain it, and it's not meant to be, but it's meant to be. My book is it is in written form and audio form, and both of those forms are delivering the same message, but it's delivering it in a very different way. And I'll just explain how and why in a brief second. I'm a hypnotist. I wrote this book in trance, meaning that I got into a very creative stance. I had a little microphone sitting here and I just recorded streams of consciousness about little subjects and recorded those and edited them in a book. But
Well,
it's me talking in kind of a rambling manner. It's not me narrating the written word of my book. It's talking about the same thing, but then I took the recordings once those were complete, had them transcribed, and then had them edited and formatted in a way that's more reading friendly. Because, if you read a transcript of my words, particularly because I tend to ramble and talk in circles, some of that, very much of that, is actually by design, but it's more easily received if you're listening to it than if you're reading a transcript of it. So it's the same message delivered in two different ways. So what we're going to do is 9 chapters in the book, 9 weeks in the program. We're going to look at it chapter by chapter And so this will be an opportunity, hopefully, for the people that would like to participate to read the chapter. They're short. The entire book's only about 125 pages, 9 chapters. So there's not a whole lot of writing and listening in the book, but each chapter also has a corresponding guided, hypnotic, trancy visualization where I'm using my hypnosis protocols to really get people to have an embodied understanding of the material. So, it's kind of layered in a couple of different ways. And the book club, I'm going to record it. So if you're interested in participating, it'll either be very low cost or it might be free. I'll announce the price when I announce the thing. If I'm charging, it won't be very much. But
Sounds
it's an
amazing, Devin.
opportunity if this is the type of stuff that we talk about here is what I cover in the book. And I'm hoping it will be a pathway to accelerating self-study of this material, and I'll be creating those resources. So it'll be a book club, it'll be half R&D team, it'll be half product creation and half embodiment. So lots of halves that we will work to bring together. If you're interested, send me a DM on Facebook or go to my group, which is called Our Mindful Life on Facebook, and they'll be the first to get those details. In fact, I'm going live to that group a little bit later today.
Wow, great. Sounds
to
fantastic.
to talk about it.
And where
So
is your book available if people wanted to get it?
it should be pretty much everywhere. It's on Amazon and Audible, and I used a service that purports to get it listed everywhere. I do recommend that you buy the audio book because the audio book comes with a PDF of the written portion. So I
Okay.
think that's the
Okay.
best way to consume the material.
Material.
And if you
Okay.
buy the book, you don't also get the audios. You get links that drive you to the audios. But the one
Okay.
complaint that I've gotten about the book is it's cumbersome to have to go from the book and go and listen to the audios. And I haven't gotten any complaints from the audio people. So it seems the best way to go.
Okay.
Okay.
Cumbersome for a book called Unencumbered.
Not a good combination, is it?
No,
No,
it's not what you want.
not what we're searching for at all.
Oh well.
Yeah, so that concludes today's show. We will be back next week. Tech will be a little bit smoother, and we're likely to start on time because our Queen Miriam will be back running tech rather than me trying to cobble it together, so to speak.
She's good at herding cats, our Miriam.
So thank everybody for joining us, and those of you who have caught this in the replay, thank you for staying through all the way to the end. We
Yes,
will see
thank
you
you.
next time. Bye bye for now.
Bye bye.